antagonism between capital and labor. Instead, he said, and I quote, "If the capitalists do not heed their advice and read the signs of times, non-violent non-cooperation in the ultimate analysis is bound to achieve justice for the exploited without doing injustice to the exploiter, and in the process ennobling him too." Prakash Sale, a Gandhian economist, writes, and I quote, Gandhiji was not an economist in the conventional sense of the term, and yet his economic thinking, which started in the ad hoc manner of replies to questions and ultimately blossomed into a system, is most revolutionary. Gandhi seeks to combine Lincoln's love of liberty with Lenin's urge for equality, without resorting to the barrel of a gun. For Gandhiji, all life was connected, and therefore one cannot separate the economic man from the social man, or the political man, or even the plants and the trees. He took a holistic approach to his thinking and actions, and he said that human beings must live as part of nature, not apart from nature. The present strikes and the violent confrontation clearly cannot be seen as individual problems. It requires a much more considered and broader response and strategy in order to prevent similar occurrences in the future. What we see is that at the core of the issues that face us today is the struggle for access to resources. How to change this collision course that has been set a few centuries ago, resulting in the widening of the divide. A solution offered by the socialists is the need to achieve a classless society. Can this be achieved by the workers taking over power and control? If this happens, the capitalists argue, there would be no funds accumulated, there would be no development, and society will collapse into a retrogressive mode. On the other hand, the solution offered by Gandhiji is based on changing society. He spoke of the need to change people's perspective of life and thought processes. His philosophy of satyagraha was based on his belief that there was some good in every person. Gandhiji advocated that the first step was to analyze objectively the situation, both from our own perspective as well as from the perspective of the opponent. When we can begin to understand what is that the opponent is bothered about, then we can find solutions more objectively, and we can both bring about changes in the thinking of our opponents as well as those changes that may be necessary in ourselves. He was never blind to the fact that we too may have certain defects which we need to address. This approach is what endeared him to even his opponents. For him, there were no quick fixes. His was a slow and lengthy process, but Gandhiji believed that it was the only way society can be changed, and that society would become nonviolent. The prevalence of violence is not only seen in South Africa. All over the world, there is increasing violence and intolerance within families, communities, societies, and in the broader area of one country against another. There are millions of narratives all around the world where violence and destruction take center stage. There are also many researchers and analysts who have come up with a string of reasons for these acts of violence. No one reason can be seen as the only reason for the prevalence of violence. So in summary, I'm saying firstly that we in South Africa are not unique and do not have a world record of violence, as is often said. But let me hasten to say that this does not mean that in being in good company, we can be complacent and not do anything about the violence that we see. Secondly, there are many reasons to the use of violence and many theories. One cap does not fit all. Thirdly, violence is not confined to any race, religion, class, gender, or ethnic group. The manifestation of violence are certainly seen erupting in all sectors of society. And fourthly, violence cannot be categorized as only physical infliction of force against another. There are other forms of violence, such as violence of economic, social, and psychological deprivation and exploitation, and the violence of discrimination and oppression of a particular group, which are equally harsh, and we should know, we've been through it. In placing these 4 points before you, I want to, at the outset, dispel the commonly heard myths that we are the violence capital of the world, that violence is a common feature of Africa or of the Muslim religion, religious sector, that violence occurs because of poverty, and that violence is the physical infliction of harm on another. Significantly, on 27th of June 2007, at the 61st session of the United Nations General Assembly, a resolution to declare 2nd of October, the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, as an International Day of Nonviolence annually was adopted. This resolution was moved by India and supported by South Africa. The resolution affirmed, and I quote, "Nonviolence, tolerance, full respect for all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, democracy, development, mutual understanding, and respect for diversity are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. The universal relevance of the principle of nonviolence and desire to secure a culture of peace, tolerance, understanding, and nonviolence were affirmed." I close quote. In observance of the first International Day of Nonviolence at an informal meeting of the plenary held in the United Nations General Assembly Hall, both Sonia Gandhi on behalf of India and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma for South Africa addressed the forum. They reiterated that observance of nonviolence did not mean that communities suffering oppression must not raise their voices against such oppression. In fact, they confirmed that issues of justice and human rights must be addressed through the use of nonviolent strategies. They also spoke of the spiral effect of violence and its destructive cause. They affirmed the dire need to ensure that violent actions cease, as there were severe environmental constraints arising as a direct result of violent actions and destruction of people and property. I think this is a very important point because we are looking at environmental issues, and we know that one of the reasons for our environment deteriorating is the violence that we see around us. This year is the 3rd year since this declaration, Yet we see that violence is becoming endemic in the world. There seems to be frustration with nonviolent action, as it is perceived that nonviolent action does not draw the attention of the authorities, the international community, or the media. On the other hand, violent action draws quick attention. Are we as civil society, as media, as authorities able to remedy this perception? In her speech at the UN, Sonia Gandhi said, and I quote, "War, conflict, and bloodshed have long been rooted in human history and the human psyche as the preordained and inevitable instruments of power. Violence has come to be regarded as the norm and nonviolence as a mere aberration." Daily we see this statement being affirmed on the streets, in the home, in communities, and among states. Violence is on the increase. People see violence as the only way of resolving conflict. Here in South Africa, we are seeing violence on the streets and in public protests. Now, Gandhiji wrote, and I quote, "Those who seek to destroy men rather than their manners adopt the latter and become worse than those they destroy, under the mistaken belief that the manners will die with the men. They do not know the root of the evil." And Tolstoy wrote, and I quote, "The miseries of men are due to their discord, and their discord results from their not following the truth, which is one, but falsehood, which is legion. The only means by which men can be united is by union in the truth, and therefore the more sincerely men seek the truth, the more nearly they will approach to this union. This takes time and patience, but the nub lies in how we can convince the masses of our people, and more especially our leaders, on the need to use nonviolent action rather than violent action, when they are seeing that violence draws sharp attention, quick results, makes them feel macho, and is propagated as the right way of life in the media. I believe that it is possible if enough of us begin to turn the tide. Last year, Gandhi Development Trust organized roundtable discussions on the issue of nonviolence on 2nd of October. A range of community organizations and government departments were invited to grapple with the issues and come up with suggestions that would help us in building a culture of nonviolence. We had about 30 round tables with 10 people sitting on each table and one facilitator who was trained. And we asked them 4 questions. We asked them to address 4 questions. The first question was, why is violence seen as the only way to settle individual or community disputes? The second question was, what are the pros and cons of violent action? And what are the pros and cons of nonviolent action? How can we, and the third question was, how can we create space for effective nonviolent action? And the fourth question was, what role can the community and other stakeholders play in promoting nonviolent action? What came out of these discussions was interesting. Among the key reasons for choosing a violent option was self-preservation. Choosing violence is a learned behavior from early childhood, and in this, the media and parents and peers are the culprits. This is what the young people say.